There's never been a faster or easier way to start your weight loss journey than with PlushCare. PlushCare accepts most insurance plans and gives you online access to board-certified physicians who can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Take charge of your health and speak with a board-certified physician about a weight loss plan that's right for you. Get started today at plushcare.com/weight-loss. That's plushcare.com/weight-loss. plushcare.com/weight-loss.
When it comes to family vacations, there are a million different trips you can take. You can get your own trip to Texas. Or if you prefer a vacation from your family, you can always get your own leave the kids with grandma trip to Texas. So go to traveltexas.com/get-your-own for the only trip to Texas that matters. Yours.
Hello and welcome, and thanks for joining me on this episode of Stray Thoughts. I'm Damian Robb, writer, podcaster, and educator, and on this podcast, I try to cobble together some stray thoughts into messy but meaningful essays. It's a kind of audio blog, so much so that you can also read the episodes and see any associated images by going to damianrobb.com/stray thoughts. So let's do it. Let's share some stray thoughts. And for this one, I want to talk about mountains. I live on the oldest, flattest, and driest continent on Earth. I also friggin' love a mountain. Australia is located fairly securely on the Indo-Australian plate. It's not in the centre, but it's not far off, with a healthy amount of tectonic border around the country/continent's entire edge. This can be a very good thing. Earthquakes are basically unheard of. Same for tsunamis. And volcanoes? Let's just say the average Australian worries about getting suddenly covered in lava about as much as they do getting run over by a waddle of penguins. Which, by the way, I've just discovered is easily the most adorable collective noun for a group of penguins. Of course, without the edges of these mammoth tectonic plates very slowly crashing into each other underneath the country, you also lose the beautiful wrinkles such an action creates. In short, Australia is many things, but mountainous isn't one of them. Thankfully, for me, my twin brother Jonathan moved to Austria. He lives in Vienna, which it should be noted feels about as flat as our homeland, but if you head away from the city and out towards the country, you're all but guaranteed to run into some mountains. In fact, approximately 60% of Austrian territory is mountainous, covered by a little-known mountain range called the Alps. Presently, I am on a holiday/writing retreat in Europe with my wife Holly. Our first week was spent in Vienna with the aforementioned brother and his family, and which I wrote all about in the last Stray Thoughts. This second week, though, saw us heading west. On Sunday, we managed to mooch a Mother's Day breakfast cooked by Jonathan of French toast, bacon, mascarpone, banana, strawberry, and maple syrup. With our bellies feeling as full as the bags on our backs, we headed for the train station. Now, I want to call myself out here because sometimes I can be a slow learner. Despite previous experience and having already learned this lesson on earlier trips, I hadn't paid the extra required to book specific seats on the train. This meant that our trip started with a stressful rush where we randomly chose a carriage, then got halfway down it before realising all the seats had been booked, only to then get stuck by the onboarding horde of smug and knowing commuters who had booked their seats, before finally bullying our way through to the next carriage where it turned out none of the seats were booked. Always good to start a journey with panic. We found some seats and settled in. Stress must make you hungry because despite our tasty and filling breakfast, we immediately pulled out our lunch. This had been brought in an almost identical panicked rush about an hour before, as since it was a Sunday and Mother's Day, the few shops that were open were bursting with a swarm of customers. I pretty much got to the front of the line, pointed to the first sandwich I saw in the display booth, and in broken and heavily accented German asked for 2 of them. They were delicious, it should be noted. A seeded roll with a mess of ham, cheese, chives, and just the right amount of horseradish. Hunger once more sated, we sat back and waited for the mountains. Train travel is by far my favourite form of transport. You're on the ground, for one thing, which I like, and your bags and belongings get to stay with you, so you have easy access to books and laptops and snacks. And they also have this great thing called leg room. It's amazing. Highly recommend. Also, if you're heading from Vienna to the mountains, you get to see said mountains out the window long before you get there. It's like mountain foreplay. I get all excited and worked up seeing those giant, glorious protuberances through the glass before finally arriving and then being truly spellbound seeing them in the flesh. And yes, I am a mountain pervert. In all seriousness, there is something about mountains that I can't put into words. Something about their size and grandeur enraptures me. I can sit and stare at one and take it all in while also feeling like I can never truly capture it in my mind's eye. There's also a comfort to being in a mountain town, to knowing you're nestled in amongst all these giant sentinels watching over you, and that at any time you can look above the buildings and see a wave of tree, snow and rock-covered land reaching into the sky. Like I said, I freaking love a mountain. The mountain town we were headed for was Kufstein. If you haven't heard of Kufstein, all I can say is that neither had I until the planning of this trip. We chose it for two reasons. One, it looked pretty, and two, it was on the train line. This second week of our trip is still a working one, as not only am I writing, but Holly is quite literally not on holidays yet, simply working remotely. So we needed somewhere convenient that would ideally still afford us some touristic possibilities once we'd clocked off for the day, and Kufstein seemed to fit the bill. Let me tell you, it delivered. The town itself is quite a gorgeous one. It's bisected by the Inn River, a tributary of the Danube, and features a picturesque fortress from the 12th century, paved roads, a town centre made up of a park, a university and a number of shops and boutiques, and of course, is almost entirely surrounded by mountains. Our apartment for the week, a clean and serviceable 2-bedroom, overlooks one of these mountains. Mostly I wrote from the balcony, watching the many variations of its face as the sun and shade passed across it. Holly had a desk inside, and we worked from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. to better cross over with Holly's Australian co-workers. While we have many great places and experiences planned for this trip, this week was the one we had perhaps talked about the most. This is because the holiday proper starts after it. I'll keep writing words, but for Holly, she'll be closing the laptop with the intention to keep it closed until we're once more back on home soil. And so this week was the only one where we'd be working and holidaying at the same time, taking the ordinary, working an 8-hour day, and adding the extraordinary, immediately stepping outside under the shadow of the Austrian Alps and heading towards one of its mountains as soon as the workday was done, which is exactly what we did. The first day we did this, we intended to start off easy and follow a walking track that would take us around the base of one of the mountains. But thanks to immediately getting lost and taking a wrong turn, we instead accidentally walked up a mountain. We clued onto this pretty quickly. Our leisurely and mostly flat track was instead ascending rather rapidly. It would continue that way for the entire walk. An hour and a half of up. Deciding to lean into it, we chose a new spot on the map and headed for it. A mountain hut where we could rest and get a drink. Accidentally walking up a mountain, it turns out, is tough. Our calves stretched and burned as our sweat kept up a steady stream. The scenery was beautiful, green and lush and bursting with the bounty of spring. But there was one thing that it mostly denied us as we trudged our way up its side. Mountain views. To continue my mountain pervert line, the trail was edging us, withholding those sweet mountain views behind its wall of foliage. And so we kept on, ever upwards and then more upwards and then even a little bit more, with the path always reaching slightly higher in front of us and always denying us a clear look at the mountains. I'll also add in here that I had gone for a 5-kilometre run earlier that morning, blissfully unaware at the time that I would be walking up a mountain that afternoon. Still, we carried on, and eventually on the rise in front of us emerged the mountain hut. With great exhaustion, we climbed up its steps, and there the edging came to an end because spread out before us was an explosion of mountains. It was glorious. Equally as glorious was the cool and refreshing lemon radler we would soon be guzzling. We headed inside and were quickly shepherded back out again by a ruddy-faced Austrian mountain man speaking a flurry of German we didn't understand. We got the gist though. Pick a seat and he'd come to us. We did, choosing one with a choice mountain view, and after another rapid-fire scattering of German from our mountain man, we made our order. He was soon back with some long green bottles, sweating deliciously, which he poured into tall glasses emblazoned with his own ruddy-cheeked face. We drank deep, looked out over the view, and spoke about how this was a pretty excellent way to end a workday. As for the trail we had intended to do, we did eventually make our way back to it a few days later. The weather, being spring, had been moving rapidly between grey skies and bursts of sun, and so we were a bit unsure if we should brave heading out for a walk that day. But when the workday finished, the sky had returned to a warm yellow light, and so we packed a small backpack and headed out. The path this time was indeed flat, for about 10 minutes. Then it again shifted to incline and stayed that way. It turns out when walking in the Alps, even a track graded as easy is still going to see you heading up at some point. The grading was more gentle than the previous walk, and so while I was still sweating, it wasn't nearly as taxing. And then the rain came in. And then the hail. We rushed underneath a tree, threw on our raincoats, and could do nothing but giggle as an onslaught of small, angry chunks of ice pummeled us. Still warm with the gentle exertion and mostly safe under the twin powers of the tree's branches and our raincoats, it was one of those magical moments where getting caught in the rain is a strange delight, and the intensity of the hail was mesmerizing rather than upsetting. You can also see some video of this as well as a bunch of other photos from the week by going to the written version of this episode at damianrobb.com/stray thoughts. The rain and hail eventually eased up and we made a break for it, heading to a small hotel located on the mountain side. We managed to catch them just as they were opening the bar and restaurant for the afternoon. We very timidly approached the door where we were greeted by an older woman. While her body language and vocal tone told us she would rather serve a dead rat than us, her words all but ordered us inside. We stepped into a hallway lined with rows of identical closed doors. The hotel's reception desk was at the end, but because we weren't checking in, we were entirely unsure where to go. Another woman appeared, younger, gentler, but still with a level of intimidating sternness. She pointed at one of the many identical doors and kindly suggested we enter it. Or at least that's what I presume, as truthfully I have no idea what she said. But enter we did, and found a plush and empty restaurant. Picture in your mind what you think the interior of an Austrian mountain chalet's dining area would look like. Yep, that's exactly it. A wooden ceiling, deer heads and other knickknacks on the wall, and plump seating booths in muted colours. A waiter soon arrived, moving with a speed and intensity that suggested he had a full house rather than just two wet Australians, and we ordered some beers. Then we ordered two more. Outside, the rain continued to pour. There is one final mountain trek that I'd like to tell you about. This one took us higher and further than either of the other two, and delivered upon us scenes of such astounding beauty that despite seeing and standing amongst it, I truly cannot comprehend the magnitude and wonder of such a view. It began with a chairlift. Chairlifts have to be one of the more clever ways to get up a mountain. Definitely, it was a lot quicker than either of our previous walks. They are also, for me, a little bit terrifying. Admittedly, it didn't help that when I first got on this one, a single-seater that quickly rose up and out of view, I forgot to put the bar down. That was until Holly yelled out at me from the ground to do so. I think the gruff, middle-aged male chairlift employee was a bit too stunned that I had forgotten to do so to tell me himself. Thank goodness for Holly, because the ground was already pulling away from me as I drew the bar down and held on tight. One more piece of security between me and all that open air around me. I've landed my feet onto its lower half and rose into the sky. Thankfully, I was able to squash my panic pretty quickly, instead replacing it with anxiety as I potentially foolishly drew my phone from my pocket and did my best to both not drop it and capture the sights rising up before me. It got me mixed results, but it soon wouldn't matter. The chairlift took half an hour to get to the top, the town falling further and further behind us as in front, the distant mountaintop became less distant. We got to the end, did the awkward lift the bar and jump off mid-movement as the chairs don't stop, and were immediately punched in the face with mountains. I mean that as literally as I can without a mountain actually making a fist and punching me, as the view was a breathtaker. We stood on top of the mountain and looked out at a valley and beyond to all the rows and varieties of mountain that surrounded it. Complex and beautiful, in awe and speechless, giddy and giggly with the inability to fully grasp or mentally articulate all that we were seeing. Faced with this incomprehensible natural spectacle, we did what everybody does. Got out our phones and started snapping photos. Eventually, we pulled our eyes and phones away from the view to find the start of the 9-kilometre trek we would do in and around the valley. We needn't have bothered putting the phones away. Every step of that walk felt like standing at a new lookout where each view was as unique and beautiful as the last. It alternated and changed with enough frequency that it was like seeing the collection of mountains anew every time. The impulse to take more photos than my phone could hold was huge. But I've danced this dance before and know that to try and fully capture such a scene is impossible. If my brain can't do it, then there's no chance my phone's camera was up to the job. Saying that, I did take many a photo, but of a quantity that I feel was both appropriate and manageable. The walk itself was perfect, challenging but achievable. This was also on a Saturday and not after work, and so we felt fresher and more ready to take it on. We also stopped at yet another mountain hut, this time to a coffee and a sausage, and of course, views that continued to punch me in the face. Our walking was slow, mostly to take in all the sights, and of course, there were some moments of extreme incline. If there's one takeaway from this post, it's always expect an incline. But we were able to overtake some people. Granted, they were all either elderly or children, but I still counted it as a win. It took around 4 hours from start to finish, including our rest, and by the time we were done, we were pleasantly sore and ready to enjoy a grapefruit radler back at the apartment. We made our way down the mountain the same way we'd gotten up and did a final walk back through the town and onto our temporary home. After a rest, we did one final walk that day, out to a small bar on the river. By the time the day was done, we'd each completed around 27,000 steps. The following day, we decided, would be a rest day. There is, of course, more about this past week that I could tell you, more gushing over mountains that I could do, further tales of our small adventures. But this feels like plenty. I will, however, say that if you are a fan of mountains, or would even go so far as to call yourself a mountain pervert, then there are worse places you could visit than Kufstein. In 4 weeks, I will return to the oldest, flattest, and driest continent on Earth. Thankfully, I will also return with a phone full of photos and a head full of memories of one of those things I love most: mountains. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Stray Thoughts. And if you'd like, you can find me on socials at damianrobb.writer, or feel free to send me an email at damianrobb.writer@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this, leave a review, tell your friends, all that good stuff. Otherwise, I look forward to talking to you next time and sharing some more Stray Thoughts. And until then, do whatever you have to, commit whatever crimes necessary, travel as far as required to get yourself to some beautiful mountains.
Hey parents, Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list: teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.